Greetings to you all who have joined us for this SAPES Policy Dialogue today. Perhaps I should begin by giving a bit of a background on the subject of the NTA, the origins of it, which go back to 2016, when a number of us, including Tony Rila and myself, decided to launch the NTA idea against the background of the conditions, in our view, at the time, which tended to speak and justify the NTA process. As is well known, and those of you who have studied the transitional issues, transitional governments, these normally take place when there is a serious crisis. In general, when there is blood on the floor, or when the conflict has reached such a stage where it is now necessary to put in place a transitional arrangement through which, and at the end of which, there can be a new government, new elections, and a democratic dispensation. Now, in Zimbabwe, we have had such precedents, in particular, the Longest House Agreement of 1979. The Longest House was premised on the need for peace and an end to the rebellion by the Rhodesian government against its own people, and in a situation in which there was necessity for war. And therefore, the Longest House Agreement put an end to that war and brought in place a constitution and a transitional arrangement of 3 months from the signing of the agreement on the 22nd of December to the elections in February 1980. And after which, elections, a new government of Zimbabwe, and independence was declared on the 18th of April 1980. A short transition, but a transition all the same. In 2016, our observations were a record of failed elections from 2000 to 2002 to 2008 and 2013, and all the indications in 2016 that we're heading for a crisis, namely a coup, which took place in 2017. Therefore, the grounds, in our view, for a transitional authority, a transitional government, were clearly the existence of a state incapable of reform, neither politically nor economically, and a state virtually based and supported by a securocrat system, the military in particular. At first, in the background, as was the case from 2000, and then overtly in 2017, with the coup of 15th of November 2017. So, perhaps to the extent that we failed to bring about transitional authority at the time, might be an indication that the conditions were not ripe for such an arrangement. But perhaps, more or less, it was a question of bad judgment by those who took power in 2017, because the conditions were quite ripe, perhaps just as ripe as they are now, to get us out of this mess to a better tomorrow. And so what began in 2016 as largely voices in the wilderness in the form of the platform of concerned citizens has arisen on the 13th of March with the policy dialogue on the subject, and after which a steering committee was set up. And in less than 3 months, what began as a policy dialogue is quickly moving into a movement with virtually, you saw on X and elsewhere, the new slogan, NTA now. We have the idea is speculated to the grassroots in the form of the unions, the teachers, the nurses, the health workers, the students, the youth. And it's now no longer identified with individuals like Ibo Mandaza. It is now a movement its own. And the process now is to move towards a national conference at which the NTA document will be discussed, a panel bitted, and then sold to the people, to the nation, at home and abroad, and the broad objective of a referendum in which people will decide on the NTA and how it should be implemented. We're still far from that, but today is part of that process, moving us closer. The last policy dialogue on this subject on the 15th of May, those of you who missed it may go to YouTube and the SAPES Trust website. But it was an indication of the amount of interest in the INT idea that we had on that day more than 600 people on the platform. And since then, there are almost 25,000 people who have visited that discussion on YouTube. And that last policy dialogue was very simple in its title. An NTA, what is it? How does it work? What can it do? These are some of the questions raised in that policy dialogue on the 15th of May. We went far with it in getting people, experts like Tendai Biti, Masaraure, to explain why we need it and even how it will work. And that's where the idea of a referendum came up. Today, one of our presenters, Obet Masaraure, or the president of the Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, ATUZ, and a member of the steering committee, put it very succinctly on X when he said the NTA is not a fantasy. It is a practical solution to the seemingly insurmountable Zimbabwean crisis. And he put it this way: today, we dialogue on how the NTA will enhance state capacity and political will to tackle corruption and deliver essential services. So, the NTA is about bread and butter issues. It's about redeeming a country in crisis, a country in which we do not have the democratic dispensation that is enjoyed in the neighborhood. We cannot speak of an accountable executive. We cannot speak of a vibrant legislature when the parliament is in tatters. We don't even know who are the MPs, when most of them have been recalled. And clearly, we don't have an independent judiciary. These are the main elements of a democratic dispensation. And we have a situation where the security apparatus hangs over us, unlike the neighborhood, where the army is in the barracks, securing the country's national security. So we want to a transitional authority which is secured by the security forces towards a democratic dispensation as and when the period of the NTA ends. And so to help us today, we have Nick Donovan, a senior investigator at Sentry. Nick has been our guest a number of times here, and he will outline for us the extent of the corruption and possibly how that impacts on social services. I want to say I want to make the point here that it's not so much, although that is important, the extent to which corruption has affected education, health, social services, the rate of unemployment, and so on and so forth. It is also about the extent to which, were it not for corruption and the wastage that goes with it, Zimbabwe could be way ahead of many in the neighborhood. Today, those of us who travel around the region, we are behind when we should be ahead economically and politically. We're a great country, but here we are with 80% of all professional and skilled people out there in the diaspora. How many countries can survive and build on the resources when we are in such status? We need an NTA to establish a platform from which Zimbabwe can recover economically and politically to become a great country that it should be. Then we have Vitalis Chifakacha, a medical practitioner and a lecturer at the Botswana Medical School, but he's a Zimbabwean. He will look at the health sector, the extent to which it's in tatters. And then we have Tando Gwinji from the Youth for Innovation Trust to give us some idea of how the youth are suffering under this cloud of corruption, mismanagement. And then last but not least, Albert Masaraure, who reference to whom I've made, the president of the Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, to sum up for us. So, Nick, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Eva. And it's very good to be on with some excellent guests. I'd like to talk about two. I'm an investigative journalist, and I'd like to talk about two investigations and the findings in particular. The first one because it indicates quite how high up some of the allegations go, and the second one to talk about the cost and the high cost of the misallocation of resources. So the first one is a project we did called Spin Cash. It relates to a business deal that took place during the week-long coup in late 2017. So the main player was a South African businessman called Zunaid Motti, who set up a company called African Chrome Fields in Zimbabwe in around 2014, early 2015. When he arrived, he entered into a joint venture partnership with Rusununguku and Kululeku Holdings, the military's main holding company. He started to employ Emerson Mnangagwa Jr. as a consultant for 10,000 a month, and he entered into or started to entertain a joint venture and a partnership with a company whose chair was Justice George Chiweshe, who was the leader in the High Court and the man who kind of sprinkled the constitutional fairy dust over the coup and made it legal in late 2017. And he, after setting up the mine and getting it going, to dig out and process chrome in central Zimbabwe, Kwekwe. He had 30% of the company owned by a company with a great name of Spincash Investments PVT. And during the coup in late 2017, he sold Spincash, so sold the shares in African Chrome Fields that Spincash owned, 30% stake, to a Zimbabwean businessman, kind of an oligarch called Kuda Kwashiorkor Tagore, who's well known to everybody listening, I'm sure. And Kuda paid $120 million US over the next 8 or 9 months in installments. That money was then stuck in Zimbabwe because of exchange rate controls at the time. You'll recall it was very difficult to get money out to buy anything, really. And so Junaid Moti, although he denies this, turned to the underground black market economy and started to move money out via one guy who had the nickname Joe Dollars, and another route out via some gold traders, and another route out via people involved in the gold mafia. And so the money would disappear in Zimbabwe and reappear in South Africa or Dubai. And we had a big leak of documents that helped prove this, legal contracts and payments and so on. And during that process, there were 2 very strange payments. So one was a payment in December 2017, so just after the coup, to a company called Precabe Enterprises. Precabe Enterprises is the company that owns President Mnangagwa's farm in Kwekwe, and Precabe received $1 million. And then there was another 2 payments, each of $1 million, so adding up to $2 million, to a company called Cosmotex Investments. Cosmotex Investments, the 2 directors were somebody who is reported to be Vice President Chiwenga's niece, and somebody who is a business ally of Vice President Chiwenga. He's been a co-director with the Vice President in some of the Vice President's previous property investments, and sources have described him as the de facto investment manager. So during this process by which Junaid Moti and his company, African Chrome Fields and Spincash Investments, were trying to get their money out of Zimbabwe, they paid some money to companies very close to the 2 political leaders who had just come to power. And also, and this was part of an ongoing negotiation that long predated the coup, and I don't actually think it's particularly connected to the coup, just to show how close these circles are between the business elite, the judiciary, and the political elite. Is that also there were payments to Justice George Chiweshe during those negotiations about getting access to chrome deposits, which Justice Chiweshe's company had control over at that time, a company called Overseas Trends and Resources. So Junaid Moti adamantly denies that there's any wrongdoing, that there was money going for suspicious purposes, denies corruption, and so on. And he describes these payments to these companies that are close to the president and vice president as loans or investments. So that's the first example, and I raise it because it's the first time, and you can see the documents on our website, that there is documentary evidence of suspicious payments going to the very top of the political tree in Zimbabwe. There's a lot of hearsay about this kind of behavior, but it's the first time that there are documents indicating this. The second case also involves Kuda Kwashiorkor Tagore. It's about the Mutapa Investment Fund. So Tagore set up a company in Mauritius called Sotic International, and it went around buying lots of mines, including from the Zimbabwe Mineral Development Corporation, but also mines that were under judicial management, had gone bankrupt. So mines such as Bindura Nickel Corporation, Frida Rebecca Gold Mine, Kopje, Sandawana, and others. And we had a big leak of documents, and we saw that he had paid in total about 100 million US for these mines. He almost certainly paid more because we didn't have all of the leaked documents, but had a lot of them. And then there was a series of changes. So Tagore's company, Sotic, and its mines were taken over by a company called Kavimba Mining House, which was a partnership with the government. So the government owned 65%, and mystery private investors who were very close and linked to Kudakashe Tagore owned the remaining 35%. And then later on, in late 2023, the Mutapa Investment Fund, so the new sovereign wealth fund, which is not really a sovereign wealth fund, it's more like a holding company, bought the 35% of Kavimba Mining House that was owned by these mystery shareholders that were linked to Tagore for 1.6 billion in the form of a treasury bond. And the reason I want to raise this is because 1.6 billion in the context of Zimbabwe's economy is very large. It's about 5% of Zimbabwe's GDP. In the US, for example, that would be many trillions of dollars in a larger economy. So it's very economically significant. It was essentially the first thing that the Mutapa Investment Fund did. And when you compare the 1.6 billion treasury bond price with the 100 million that Tagore and his companies had paid for those mines about 2 or 3 years earlier, you start to see or ask the question, was there a big overpayment by the Mutapa Investment Fund of this 35%, given that they had only paid maybe a couple of 100 million or maybe a bit more, we don't know the full answer, a couple of years before, and given that previous valuations by the government of the mines had indicated that their valuation was much lower than this 1.6 billion implied. So it really looks like there was a high likelihood of an overpayment by the new sovereign wealth fund, controlled by John Manguja, former Reserve Bank governor, paid it to people and entities close to Tagore, and with the strong possibility that they'd overpaid. And as an example of where the money could otherwise have been spent by Mutapa Investment Fund, Mutapa Investment Fund also controls ZESA, the Electricity Supply Authority. And as you know, there's a big need for electrification in Zimbabwe, and that 1.6 billion treasury bond could have been used to raise investment in the electricity industry and really spread rural electrification, which would be great for economic growth across all of Zimbabwe, not just in a few mines. So it really is an example of a possible misallocation of a very large sum of money, 5% of GDP, to go to mystery shareholders rather than to a broad-based investment in the economic infrastructure of the company, of the country, or an investment in health and education, which would be a sort of soft, again, an investment in the soft skills and the upping people's health, which will also help the economic growth of Zimbabwe. Sort of been good for itself. So I don't have a full reckoning of all of the costs of corruption in Zimbabwe. You'd have to go back many years, back to the first examples of Willow Vale and so on. But the real cost of corruption, I think, is through the misallocation of resources. So there isn't much money going around in Zimbabwe. There isn't much tax revenue. It's very difficult to raise money. It's very expensive to raise money. Usually it's from Afreximbank and the interest rates are very high. So when you have public money, you've really got to think very carefully about where it goes, and spending it 5% on paying off shareholders and not declaring publicly who those shareholders are, how they're paid, whether some of that treasury bond has been cashed in at a bank already or whether it's been sold on or what. So there's no transparency over this. And it just seems like an incredibly poor investment. And I think that is the cost. There is money being wasted on gold incentives, on propping up currencies on investments in mining companies with mystery shareholders. And I think that's where the waste and the wrong roads are being taken, and that's the possible influence of corruption. And I think those two together, when you start to look at the possibility that suspicious payments were made to the political elite in the country, and then you look at the overpayment to donors to the political party. Tagare is a donor, and there's talk of him going onto the Central Committee, and he bought lots of cars for the ZANU-PF election campaign in 2018. You start to wonder whether there's a misallocation of resources for political reasons. And I think that's getting to the crux of the problem about corruption in Zimbabwe.
Nick, are you done?
I'm done, thank you.
Just a number of questions, Nick. Can you put a global figure for the last decade in terms of the volume of losses through corruption? The last discussion we had here some months ago, Tendai Biti, he spoke of $7 billion per annum being lost. And for the last 10 years, he was talking about 70 billion. What would you say is the possible extent of the losses through corruption?
I wouldn't want to say, because I haven't done the calculations in that way. All I would say is that I think there is an overpayment of hundreds of millions in this Mutapa case. And it would be a good project for someone else to do, to add up all of the past corruption cases and look at the total cost, but I haven't done that.
You haven't done that. And where does the money go? Because basically we know in some almost every one of our countries, globally, internationally, that there is corruption. But the question is, when it comes to Zimbabwe, is there always been, where does the money go to? For example, there's been talk about the $15 billion from the diamonds between 2006 and 2016. And there was nothing to show for it in terms of investment in construction and so on and so forth. One can contrast or compare that with a similar period, the era of the pirates in the Indian Ocean, many of whom invested in Nairobi, and the building boom in Nairobi was visible. And I remember my colleague and friend Peter Nyong'o coming to give a lecture at SAPES in 2016 and exclaiming that he saw no cranes in the skyline. And he was asking, where is the 15 billion gone to? And again, in the previous discussion, it was suggested that most of this money is being banked outside the country. And mention of made of Dubai, Mauritius, and so on and so forth. Do you have any, does Century have any information as to where monies are being stashed?
Yeah, I mean, for diamonds, it's really difficult to tell, but for diamonds, there was an indication where a company called Great Gem Corp was set up in the Seychelles, and it was set up by Martin Rishwaya, who obviously is a relative of the president, but also at the time was the permanent secretary at the Ministry of Defense. And it was a joint venture with the Russians. And this was at a time when Martin Rishwaya and the other director of the company, Graham Mashava, who later became the head of office for Vice President Chwenga. It looked like this was set up at the same time as Anjin Investments, and given that it had Great Gem in the title, it looked like a possible way of selling diamonds or something like that. And then for Mbada diamonds, you had a mystery company called Transfrontier, which owned 25% of Mbada diamonds and was registered in the British Virgin Islands, and that owned a bit of a Hong Kong company, which owned a bit of a Mauritius company, which owned a bit of Mbada diamonds. So you have these offshore companies that are formed, but you don't really know. You can see some of the pipe work of the offshore world being used by participants in the Zimbabwe diamond industry, but you can't see what funds are flowing through that pipe work, and that investigation is still yet to be done. And those companies, of course, might be totally legitimate and so on. Just in terms of cranes and construction, there is a very large crane, or was a very large crane in Borrowdale building Mr. Tagore's house. You can see it from space. It's a very large, with a long drive, and the pictures of it which we've seen have swans in the lake in the front. So they're still building that. So if you drive down Luna Road, you can see some cranes going along there. Whether that's proceeds of corruption or hard-earned industry, that would be for others to judge.
Yeah, these aren't frivolous questions, because I think we have to, in discussing the NTA and the whole process of transition, the issue of repatriation of stashed away funds becomes very pertinent. Do you have any precedents? We hear of Nigeria, for example, the Abacha regime. We hear even Malawi, where there was 7 cash found in one of the late president's palace. There's talk of the billions stashed away under Mugabe, and more billions stashed away under the current regime. What are you people hearing out there as to the possible amounts of money stashed away, and what advice can you give in terms of future efforts to have these monies repatriated and reinvested in the fiscus in the country, and to address emergent issues such as those we're discussing today, health and education?
So the process, I think, for Nigeria is like a 20-year process for and there were British banks and British companies involved in helping to hide all of this. That's like a 20-year process of repatriation, and I wouldn't, if whatever government comes into power starting to look for corrupt funds overseas, I wouldn't rely on it at all as a source of funding, because it takes so long. And the way that the British involvement has historically been is to have the offshore industry, which turns some money which is stolen into money which no questions were asked, and then it's reinvested into something which then looks legitimate, and then is put into property or investments in a way which there are no fingerprints of where the money came from. So that both makes it look very legitimate, but makes the process of finding it really tricky. And Britain, Switzerland, other European countries have historically been the beneficiaries of this, but we have a form of sort of polite corruption in which we turn a blind eye to where it's come from, because it's been laundered through offshore centres first. So it is a challenge to find stolen assets. It's a 20-year challenge, and it really relies on government-to-government work to trace it through the banking system. And there isn't an easy sort of pot of money that I've heard about through, for example, very ostentatious villas or anything like that of Zimbabweans living abroad. I think one of the big ostentatious moments were the two were revealed through different divorce cases, and Grace Mugabe's, Bonner Mugabe's divorce revealed a large number of funds or farms, a large number of cars and so on, that looked in the tens of millions. And given that she was just one of 5 beneficiaries that we know of the will, I think it's possible that a lot of the money is actually is in property within Zimbabwe. rather than outside, because of the history of sanctions and the nervousness about moving money outside by the political elite. Maybe it's gone elsewhere, but it's probably not in the West, I would say. That might be one of the legacies of sanctions, is that if you wanted to put your money, you wouldn't stick it in London. You'd stick it maybe in China, or you would invest it in your own country. Not investing it maybe is too strong a word.
Yeah, well, what about the Angola president, the recent situation where Lourenço, the new president who succeeded Dos Santos, went to town in cleaning up the Dos Santos empire, financial empire? Did you have any details that you could reveal on this discussion as to how that was?
So even there, you had like some of the cases. So I was investigating one where you have Isabel Dos Santos, very well known, being pursued with cooperation between different jurisdictions. There's another daughter who I won't name, but she had a property in London, which was like maybe 3 million, so 4 million, so a lot of money even in British terms. And her type
pounds,
of
4 million pounds.
Yes, yeah, like large sums in UK sums, but not at Isabel Dos Santos kind of levels. But it's what it appeared is that she was benefiting from nepotism. So she was getting business and public roles that she probably wasn't qualified for, and benefiting because of who she was, and therefore was slashing those proceeds rather than large scale theft. And what that meant was it's going to be really difficult to prove that there is a stolen asset rather than a sort of nepotistic asset, and it's really difficult to claw that back. And with Isabel Dos Santos, what she was expert at was doing things in a very complicated way. She's had a very sophisticated setup there. So again, I think all credit to Angola, but it's going to still take many years to get the money back into the country and into the fiscus.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick, for now. You can see where our questions are pursuing. We want to find out where our monies are. There is no doubt, if you look at Zimbabwe, it's a resource base. If you look at and compare it with the neighborhood, even Botswana, where I was a few weeks ago, I mean, really the contrasting scenarios in terms of infrastructure development alone is frightening in the sense that the deficit in development in Zimbabwe is scary, and compounded correspondingly in the disaster that we are going to hear now in the health and education sectors. Thanks, Nick. Vitalis, we turn to you now to take the theme. What is your observation, sir?
Good evening, Ibo. Good evening, everyone. For me, corruption is created by the environment in which people find themselves. And when you look at some countries, it's cultural, in others it's adopted, in others it's actually learned behavior. And I think for us in Zimbabwe, it's probably both adopted and learned behavior, because that's the only way that you can survive. Now, unfortunately for us, the health sector has generally been a corrupt sector right from the beginning. I don't know whether you remember the olden days when you had these pastoral, we used to call it pastoral care. The doctor goes to the farm, he goes to visit families at home, he goes to a factory and so forth and so forth. And when he comes back home, he's got a lot of cheese, a lot of eggs. They called it gifts. But I think between you and me, that already was corruption. Then we move into a stage where pharmaceutical companies used to send representatives with beautiful goodies, bags, watches. They would send you on trips. They would do meetings for doctors and so forth and so forth. And nobody actually really looked at it as kind of bribe or corruption. But I think today we know it is, because a lot of countries have now stopped this. Africa is interesting. I'm a visiting lecturer, and they call me sometimes to talk about the history of the health system in Botswana to American visitors and to the students here. And I always tell them that if you want to talk about African health history, look at three phases: the pre-colonial, the colonial, and the post-colonial. And the pre-colonial is the only one where you had equity in health, and that is important to the subject matter in which we find ourselves now. The chief was using the same doctor as the common person. If you could not pay, you always found somebody who helped to make sure that things were paid. Then we moved into the colonial, where the color of your skin determined the quality of your health system. And I can assure you, some of our parents, when they couldn't get Gomo medication, they'll just go to Pari, which was the white hospital, get an orderly who can get you something, and you pay him with something to get that medication that he wanted. And that already is a beginning of the corruption we are talking about. But it's post-colonial where it actually becomes worse, because it is the time when your social status, your socio-economic status, and your bank statement decides the quality of your health system. So you are forced to pay somebody because you have money. I mean, we are talking today, Edgar Lungu was the president of Zambia. He passed on today in South Africa at a hospital in South Africa and not in his own country. He got there because maybe he had money, because it's his social status, and he couldn't do it in his own country because the health system probably could not protect him. And you ask, what happened to all the monies probably that was put by the Minister of Health to build the hospitals and train people in that particular country? Now, 30 years ago, Zimbabwe and other countries signed the so-called, in 2008, signed the so-called Ouagadougou Declaration on Primary Health Care and Health Systems in Africa. There are 9 priorities, but the 2 are the ones I think that are important for this discussion. The first one is leadership and governance in health systems, and the second one is community participation. Now, let me clarify. A lot of people have this misconception that when we talk of leadership and governance, we are only looking at governments. We are only looking at politicians. It's more than that. Governance and leadership starts at the local level. You have a clinic which is run either by the local authority or by a village or by whatever it is. The thieving, the stealing, the embezzlement is starting there. How do we deal with it at that particular level? And who is the leader to the clinic? Is it the district level, the provincial level, and what roles are they playing in this whole system that we are seeing happening? So you have the local level, the district level, the provincial level, and then you go to your central level. So unless we have good leadership within that chain, we will end up with what we are seeing today of what is happening in our countries. Transparency International, I think in 2015, came up with a very interesting piece of work. It's entitled Zimbabwe, Overview of Corruption in the Health and Education Sectors and in Local Governments. Very interesting reading. And 74% of the respondents in this study said they paid something for them to get service. I don't know what the numbers were, but still, this is a shocking number when you hear somebody saying, for me to get service, which is supposed to be free, which is supposed to be provided for me, I have to pay. And that takes us to the first thing that we talk about when we talk about corruption in a country, including Zimbabwe. Bribery or informal payments. For you to be referred from a clinic to the next level, you pay somebody. For you to get even the medication that your doctor has prescribed, you probably have to pay somebody. For you to get your laboratory services, people know. You talk to people in Zimbabwe, you talk to people in other countries in the region, they tell you, but it's part of living. We have to do that. There are only 4 countries really where this seems not to be happening at a level where you get frightened. Botswana, Namibia, the Seychelles, and Mauritius, if we are talking about the SADC region, the 16 countries, that's 4 out of 16. The rest, you got problems because of this. Because of monetary power, people then pay to get their services done. And it really has become a cancer. So you ask yourself the question, are you sure these things are happening and the policymakers don't know? The leaders in society don't know? That's impossible. Because when you walk into a village, when you talk to people who you see with wounds and you say to them, why didn't you go to the hospital? They'll tell you, well, I didn't have the money to pay somebody. That's when you realize we are in a precarious situation. The second is the theft and diversion of medical supplies. I'm a doctor, I prescribe you a Panadol, whatever. You come back and say, well, it's not there. I prescribe the next one, come back, it's not there. And then suddenly you realize maybe they should just go to a pharmacy or on Angwa Street to get them from the hawkers. And you know, the pharmacy probably got it from your medical stores. The Angwa Street definitely got it from somebody who works at a hospital. And you can't have this pilfering going on without somebody knowing that this pilfering is going on. We used to see, I live in Botswana, and we used to see on Facebook Zimbabweans advertising family planning tablets. And one day I just thought, in Botswana, you don't buy family planning tablets. So where are these people getting them from? Only to find, the Zimbabwe Family Planning Association, the package is actually written, and it's given for free. But somebody crossed with the whole box from Zimbabwe and is selling them. How did they get out of the stores of the Family Planning Association? How did they get to another country to be sold? Somebody is doing this, and somebody is gaining from it. And some people are actually not getting the family planning tablets that they are not supposed to be getting. And it's usually the poor and the vulnerable. And most of these come from the public hospitals. I must admit that most of our professionals probably have also joined the game. You take a bottle of Panadol to your house. For you, you think it's not stealing. I'm just getting from my workplace. But that's stealing. That's part of the corruption that we are talking about. Or you supply the private pharmacies. You supply the private practitioners. That's stealing from a public sector, and that's corruption that we're talking about. But the question, you can't tell me these things are happening and nobody's noticing it, okay? The West in Africa is probably, including Zimbabwe, is the public procurement malpractices, hiked prices for things. And this one usually happens then at the highest level because they are the ones who order the ambulances, who order the equipment that you need in the hospitals. And the procurement system allows for a lot of corruption to take place. And I think COVID showed us how this was possible when people were getting equipment and such from different countries. Even those which are donated by organizations or countries, somehow they find their way also either on the private market or on the streets of our countries. I was in Cameroon the other day and I'm walking with the deputy director or something, and the whole street I see these guys with cardboard boxes with virtually every drug that I know being sold in the hot sun. And I turn around to him and say, how come? He says, oh, it's the big man. And I know in West Africa, you don't understand what they mean when they say the big man. It's when I forced him to say, what does the big man mean? He says, well, your director, your peers, your minister, and so forth, they are the ones who are selling all these things. But it, but there's nothing I can do about it. And it's possible that in every other country, this is exactly what probably is happening. In some countries, for instance, I think it's Zambia, where you can buy this international card on yellow fever vaccination, because it's critical if you're going to a country like Tanzania, which is very strict about. But you can buy it at the bus terminals. You don't even need it to be injected. You just buy it. Now, that's a disadvantage to the person who is buying, disadvantage to the nation, because if I catch the disease, we will think a person has been vaccinated against it when it's not. But this is a certificate which is coming from a ministry. Somebody is selling it, and it can't get out of the ministry without somebody knowing. So our governance is failing us in coping with what we are seeing. And then you've got this favoritism, false referrals that we see a lot. People get jobs when they're not qualified. Then you also have this recruitment. I know in Zimbabwe, if you want to become a nurse, you pay somebody. So you're not sure now, is the person qualified enough or not? And what we tend to forget is, if I come in corruptly, my whole life I probably will be corrupt. Let's face it. I'm used to it now. That's the way to go. So if I come into the training by paying somebody, I probably want to recoup my money later. So when I start working as a professional, I started charging people so that I recoup my money, just like I gave somebody else for me to be trained. Nurses who want to go to other countries need to get some certificate, clearance certificate, I think it's called. It costs me $300. That's a lot of money. A lot of them pay for it, they never get it. And you're surprised that some get it because they are connected to somebody, either at that particular place where they get them from, I think the Nurses Association, and others do not get it. And there's nothing you can do about it because it's a non-refundable money. And that $300 is a lot of money for somebody who is working in a public health facility. And you won't be surprised if then they start also to recoup back their $300. They start selling referrals, they start selling drugs, etc., etc. Then this lack of political will, particularly when it comes to what I call whistleblowers. There are a lot of people who know what's happening, but they cannot report because they know if I report, I probably am the one who gets into trouble. You need systems that protect these people who report these things that are happening. And that can only come from policymakers by making laws that make sure that these people are protected. We have seen in South Africa how people have been killed who reported millions of rands that were taking place corruptly at certain hospitals. And because nobody is protecting them, because there is no enforced policy that protects these people, in the end, people give up and let it continue as it has been because it doesn't help to go and report. And this comes from politics. You need then the politicians to make sure that we create an environment that protects, particularly those who are being blowers. Then you have this corruption has an impact on the health sector in many facets. One of them is reduced access to quality health. And like I said earlier on, it is the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized who suffer most. The rich ones can always go to India, China, or elsewhere where they pay for the monies that they have. Secondly, it has a major impact on the economy because when people are sick, they don't become productive. When people have got a short life expectancy, they don't work for a longer time. We need them to work for a longer time. We need them to be healthy when they go to work. When they take a lot of sick leave, it means productivity goes down. So unless policymakers understand that no matter what you think you are doing, it will have an impact on the economy of the country, we probably will still have these issues. You also have this corrosion of the quality of health. We have a lot of doctors going, and our thinking is, they're going to greener pastures. No, they are probably fed up of a system where I prescribe something, it's not there. I try something, it's not there. And sometimes you try to change things and it's practically impossible. So in the end, you just say, let me go somewhere else. And then communities start losing trust in health systems. If I go back to the Ouagadougou Declaration, community participation is critical for any health system. The planning, the implementation, and also the evaluation of the system. If our communities could be protected from reporting some of the behaviors they see, we probably would reduce a lot of this corruption in a lot of these facilities. But because they are not part and parcel of the planning, implementation, and despite the fact that we say we are practicing primary health care, we see them then adopting and also learning this terrible behavior of paying so that they can have their services, they can get the services. So how do we address this? We need the political commitment, including enacting and enforcing anti-corruption legislation. There are a lot of anti-corruption organizations in our countries, but I really don't think we see much. And this is where we argue for consequence management. If I steal, punish me. If I, even by mistake, punish me. That's called consequence management, because I'm responsible for the action that I have taken. But in most cases, they just slap you a bit on the hand and you go away. So tomorrow you'll steal even bigger because you know nothing will happen. And unless we introduce consequence management everywhere, maybe China is the only one which, but they are too extreme in the sense that they execute those people who are corrupt and steal things from the people. We need to make sure that the public is aware. But when you are in an environment where you know nothing can move without me paying something, it becomes very hard, even if you educate them, because they know they are the ones who lose at the end of the day. My mother used to say there's a concept called the cooked frog syndrome. When you take a frog and you throw it into hot boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But when you take the same frog, put it in lukewarm water, heat it up, the frog will stay in the water until it's cooked and dead. Because the system of the frog only reacts to sudden changes of temperature and not slow changes. Human beings are becoming the same. We think things are normal, which are not normal, because this is what we have been used to. And this is what is becoming of our people. They think I have to pay to get referred, because that's what everybody is doing. But it's not. It's the wrong way to do things. So we really need to educate them that these things that are happening are not normal and needs to be changed. And most importantly for me, I think transparency and accountability, especially in the procurement processes. We adopted British European systems. They probably don't work very good for us because there's no transparency, there is no accountability. We don't know who buys ambulances, how much they wear, where they got them from, how they got them. And we also then have to have the consequence management here to say, if somebody thinks that there was some corruption that took place in acquiring these things, are people taken to task? Now, when your newspapers, when your system, your judicial system, and I think this was mentioned earlier on, that when you've got a judicial system that is not very strong on certain issues, you end up with things like, but even where you have a judicial system which you think is strong, I mean, South Africa is a classical example, things still don't go right. So we really need to rethink on how do we deal with this. Now, the last one, professionals of the health sector, because we are part and parcel of this. We should start talking to policymakers on these issues. We should also come up with solutions on how to deal with the issue that we see, because it's affecting us and affecting the very client that we are trying to save. Thank you.
Vitalis, before you go, thanks very much for giving us some insight in what in Zimbabwean terms we call petty corruption.
Yeah.
Even though it has very serious consequences, especially in the health sector.
Yeah.
But here we want you to give us some indication with reference to the Zimbabwe situation, where you have reports of millions of dollars involved in corruption.
Yeah.
You know, here 50 million there was made, 100 million was made through a tender for the electoral commission, and so on and so forth. And you hear of somebody who's been giving away millions and cars like confetti, right? Almost on a weekly basis. And then you hear tragic stories about our hospitals, Parenyatwa, Gomo, Red Hospital, Impilo, where even Panadol is unavailable. Not to mention of people found dying on the floors because they know they just isn't. Is this a question of misplaced priorities, or is just people gone drunk with corruption that they can't even manage these priorities in the manner they should be? You know, I find it incredible. I mean, I was in government myself in the 80s. I can't remember myself being in such a predicament where money is thrown aside. Well, in fact, we had a health and education revolution in the 80s, where education and health were priorities. But what you see now in Zimbabwe, I mean, this is where the question of corruption comes in. To what extent can we blame it on corruption and misplaced priorities that we have tragedies that we're having in the health and educational sectors? What is your view on that?
For me, it's the community itself is where your biggest challenge is. We all think of money, money, money. And when you have a community, that's why in the beginning I said corruption is created by the environment in which you find yourself. We have a community where people think driving a Lamborghini is the thing. Driving a Rolls Royce is the thing. And yet you are looking at a health facility where most of your poor people are going and it hasn't got anything. I mean, it doesn't need a scientist to tell you that there's something wrong here. But when your community does not realize that, then you have a problem.
Yeah.
So it's the community I think we need really to start talking to say, are you seeing what I am seeing? Zimbabwe sometimes is confusing. I heard the other day that there's cholera in one of the townships. So I called a friend of mine who lives in Borodale, who is even a professional. And I'm saying, now, what about this cholera that I hear about? This guy tells me that there's no cholera in Harare. They're saying, damn, are these people living in a different country or what? And yet everybody else is saying there is cholera. So we have people who actually either deny that things exist the way they are or are living on cloud nine. So unless we start bringing those people down from cloud nine so that they actually see what you and I are talking about now, we will always have a problem. I always ask myself the question, how did these other 4 countries end up the way they are? It's because somebody has been talking to people, they bring them and show them to say, look, you can't be living like this when your other people are living like this. So I think unless
the message there on the screen, can you see it?
Yeah.
It's talking precisely to the point you have just raised. Leadership. You know, why does this kind of misplaced prioritization occur in Zimbabwe when it doesn't in the 4 countries I've mentioned?
Exactly.
It's a question of leadership, surely.
It is leadership.
Yes. No, I'll leave you there for the time being. Let me go to Tando. Tando, you'll be making some comments there on the side. Maybe you can address that. Tando. 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 Tando.
And she would be an interesting one because she's from an NGO, because they're the ones who really need to do something to deal
Tando,
with
what's
some of these
happening?
issues.
Network.
Tando.
Hello.
Yes,
Yes, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Great.
Do you have problems there?
Yes, hello.
Yes.
All right, I think I'm back now. Sorry, I might not have caught your previous question or statement. I had logged out for a minute.
Yeah, it's your turn now.
Okay.
We want to understand from your point of view and the organization that you represent or are part of, to what extent the scourge of corruption has had an impact on the youth.
All
and
right,
also
thank you so much. Firstly, I would like to say from the prison.
Sorry. Hello? Tando? Tando? David? David, can you assist? Okay, I think let's move to Tando. Master Raura, can you come in the meantime?
Oh yes. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, let me just jump in.
Yes.
I think it was great listening to the great presentations from Donovan and the good doctor in Botswana. But I just wanted to quickly say there are some who still doubt maybe the figures that are presented by the likes of Sendri. But we should now even go back to our own sources, looking at our own Matema Lois, the former head of the Anti-Corruption Commission, who is now the Prosecutor General, who clearly told us that Zimbabwe is losing 1.8 billion annually to corruption. Of course, that is an understatement. We know that we are losing way, way, way more than that. But if we are going to be working with that conservative figure, for example, to say if we could just protect that 1.8 billion which Lois admitted to, what does that translate to? We look at our referral hospitals where they would need maybe 60 million US dollars to run for the whole year. But so if you are going to give them, if we're protecting this 1.8 billion and we don't lose it, we would maybe need 30 years. 30 years would be sponsoring those hospitals with the 1.8 billion. If you are going to be looking at our learners with regard to Section 75 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, where Section 75 will say the state should fund basic education, and clearly we have 6 million learners, including those in private schools. And if we are going to be deploying only that 1.8 billion, what that means is that paying $100 for every learner, we would need 3 years just paying from that 1.8 billion, and every learner is in school. We wouldn't have these almost 3 million right now who are out of school today. We would even go on to build infrastructure, the 3,000 schools that we still need. We could easily build them. So this is a lot of money that we have. Even civil servants who are saying they need around $500. If you, with that 1.8 billion, you would pay them the 300,000 civil servants. You would pay them for the whole year. So what we are looking at is protecting that little that the state admits and ensure that we have a very efficient civil service. We have a motivated police force, and our nation is more secure. Our education and healthcare is available to our people. But instead, this very lifeblood of our nation is being siphoned by a rapacious few who are taking advantage. But we want to make it clear and try to track where are these fault lines coming from. Why is it so easy for corruption to be a reality in our republic? I think we should easily go back to how our state is constructed, and we should be very clear that we have a relic of the colonial order, where the state was designed in a way to protect the loot of a minority who were looting from the black majority. So the way even law and order was constructed was in such a manner and fashion that it was deemed lawless for you to complain and protest that your cattle have been taken away from you. I think that is the same attitude and the same structure where the law and order infrastructure that was used to arrest black people who would complain then is now being used to arrest Jacob Ngarvum in 2020, who is protesting against corruption. But now this same state is degenerated. Because as bad as that colonial order was manifestly bad, especially against the black majority, we now see how it, but they could at least respect the minority white people who voted, because the vote of that white minority was very important for those who were in power. So at least they were accountable to that particular group. And even if among those, among those white people, if they would at least loot from the national coffers, there was a way to deal with that. But now we have the politician who is in charge, the ruling elites, who have made sure that they've even manipulated the whole voting process, that it has lost meaning. So they don't even account to the voters. So we have a police force that is ready to arrest citizens. So the agent is arrested by the police force and they are jailed by our judiciary. But then the vote is never respected because the voter is never respected because the vote doesn't even count. And they've even gone a step further, where Ian Smith, for example, would account to his Rhodesian front. We have even Emerson Mnangagwa doesn't even account to his own ruling parties and PF. He's become a lord in himself. He's now a gangster who only accounts to himself when his own party can make a resolution that let's fight corruption. And you find him on the forefront of pushing ahead with the corrupt practices. So this is a clear sign that when we are saying we need a National Transitional Authority, maybe we are saying the current state in its form, it cannot reform itself. It has no capacity whatsoever to deal with these vices. It can't deal with corruption because it has become deeply corrupt itself. So the only way maybe the only plausible way is then to restructure that face and start imagining how the NTA itself, I'm starting to imagine how the NTA can start restructuring it. And we should not be afraid to even reimagine a situation where we vote even for police officers. I've seen in America, in your county, you can vote for a sheriff. I don't think if a sheriff is voted for, a dispo is voted for, they can deny citizens the right to protest who are protesting against corruption. So these are things that we should start debating whilst we are reimagining it. Do we really need the ruling elites? Because like what the Bishop Ponze said at a seminar for police officers in 1982 on 2 November, he clearly said that the police force is political, not in a partisan way, but it serves a certain class against another class. So do we want to maintain institutions like a police force that only serves the ruling elites, or we want a police force that serves the people? And if that is what we want, if we want a force for the people, we should be prepared to make radical changes when we construct the NTA, of even ensuring that these officers are voted into office. There's nothing wrong with voting for the commissioner of police. There's nothing wrong to vote for a dispo who manage the policing in your area. It ensures that the force is serving the people. So at the end of the day, that's how we remove the layers. Because if citizens can hold their leaders accountable, we remove one layer, we remove the layers that are insulating the leadership and facilitating that corruption which is going on at a whole scale, at an industrial scale. So at the end of the day, we should then be thorough to say our judiciary, when we are looking at how our justice system works, I was looking at a scenario where a woman, this is corruption at a smaller level, but affects in a bigger way, where we have a woman who is in prison, is it 30 years, but because the man or the husband stole the ID and wrote her name as a witness, the man managed to disappear, but the woman is in prison. But the woman will not testify because of a culture of patriarchy, do not testify and defend yourself in court effectively. So, but why don't we even start taking that to say, when we want to fight corruption, are we not also able to embed our own traditional justice system and the modern justice system, so that we take care of some cultural norms that could also be able to deal with corruption at the lowest level and ensure that our national assets and resources are protected. So we can go on and on, but what we trade at the moment is going to another election in 28, which we know is going to be another blood election, it's going to be another rigged election, and there's going to be perpetuation of the same looting of our resources. Zimbabwe is bleeding at the moment, and what we need is a quick solution. But if we are going to be looking at the dialectics between the thesis that is advanced by the ruling elites who are looting, and the antithesis advanced by the majority, the masses who are affected by the loot. At the moment, that is synthesized a position where the state as it is now a polished, corrupt system. But now there are underlying dialectics, which we allow, if we allow those ones to play, they can lead to the total collapse of this polished, corrupt system. And if it collapses, no one benefits. There will be chaos in this republic, and we can even lose the nation state as we know it today. And we are saying we have to avoid that by agently crafting, finding each other and find a political settlement and crafting a way forward through a National Transitional Authority, which leads to reform of our key institutions and ensuring that we have institutions that save the majority of our people, not only those who are in power. That's the only way. Then we empower the citizens to hold those in power accountable. We have a robust parliament, the same parliament we had in the past, who would hold the executive to account. Today, the parliament is dead, the judiciary is dead. Citizens' agents has been arrested by the police and jailed by the judiciary. So that has to stop. And the only way to rescue Zimbabwe right now is to think of constructing a National Transitional Authority. I thank you.
Sorry, Tejar. A number of questions. The first is, are you with me, Tejar?
Oh yes, I'm here.
Sorry, I had lost connectivity for a while. Yes, and so thank you very much for your presentation. I just have a number of questions. To what extent you are in the teachers' union? To what extent has the idea of a transitional authority become current among teachers in the rural areas? Is this idea of something to redeem the country, something that to get the country working again? To what extent has this become a major discussion point among teachers?
Oh yes, I think just to announce that at our Congress, which we held in Lupani, the teachers made a unanimous resolution that as the teachers, we, as part of our contribution to the democratization of our country, we want to participate fully in the establishment of a National Transitional Authority. It's a Congress resolution from our union representing 37,000 teachers. So that's a binding resolution for that membership, that group of teachers. But also we have also been engaging in other teachers on different spaces who are so positive, who want this breakthrough, who are so tired about with the poor salaries they are earning, who are so tired with the kind of repression they suffer when they try to demand the basics. They strike, they're expelled, they're suspended. They don't even have the right to collective bargaining, and they're saying all the other rules have failed, and we feel like this is a breakthrough.
No, but don't they ask the question, how is it going to be implemented? Don't they ask that question? And what's your response as a member of the steering committee when they ask these difficult questions? How would it be implemented? What would be the reaction of those who are in power to a transitional authority? How do we get those in power at least those in the state, for example, the civil servants, to understand that a transitional authority is in their interest in the long term? How does one start getting that across?
Oh yes. So what? Yeah, that is a very common question, a dominant question, and the way we've been responding to it is to say we no longer want the idea of an NTA to be a wish. We should be able then to demand it as citizens, and we have a history from 1999 where citizens were demanding a new constitution. The state was forced at that point to go through a referendum, and we have also to go on a dual strategy to say building a movement from below where all the citizens are saying we don't even want to vote in any election. The only voting we are going to do is for a referendum. So and then when that citizen agency is there and we bring everything to a standstill until a point where it becomes necessary for the transitional authority to be established. But also on another side, we also continue to engage those who are within the state, deploying other people, including the church, to be negotiating with the progressives within the state. We believe there are still some within the state who still want a legacy to have done the best for this country. So there should be a dual process of dialoguing for a political settlement and building pressure from below. And then when there is, obviously we'll go through a referendum, and if the people vote overwhelmingly, as we know they will do, we then go and establish an NTA, which is obviously we do not have the.
Yeah, I'll come back to you towards the end, Tijara. I want you to be able to spell out the possible trajectory from now to a national conference and to an NTA, but I'll come back to you. Let me go back to Tando. Tando, have you fixed your connectivity now? Yes, I can see you. Can you hear me? You are mute. I can't hear you. Can you hear me, Tando? Tando, can you hear me? Tando, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Your microphone, I can't hear you at all. I'm not hearing you at all. Something wrong with your microphone. Log out and come back. Log out. In the meantime, I go back to Masara Ure. We were on an interesting note about how to involve actors in the state as we go on with this process. What is your proposal as to how, for example, we have, in the public service, we have, what's the figure now, 300,000 public service?
Yeah, 300,000. We have around 300,000.
Yes. How would we get the message across to this big number of important people who are so key to the state? We're talking about capacitating the state in a state which has lost capacity because, as you can see, just read today about something like 5,000 teachers have resigned in the last few weeks. You know, when you get this hemorrhaging, and not to mention those who have gone abroad or to neighboring countries. So clearly, the state itself is beginning to sag because of capacity problems. How do we get these people the 300,000, to understand that there is a way out of this misery? There is a way out of this decadence, degeneration. There is a way out to a better tomorrow. How do we get that message across beyond policy dialogue that we're having? What do you think should be done?
Yeah, I think so much. I think we should, the first maybe strategy is then to use their organized structures. If those who have unions, we are engaging different union leaders. For the nurses, they have their leadership. We talk to the union leadership. the civil servants, the Public Service Association, among other different leaders. We talk to them through their leadership. We continue to engage, although some of them are very loyal to the establishment, but we try to convince them, and that's what we are doing, to say we can have something better than what we have. Then secondly, we then also need to organize particularly labor forums where these civil servants are engaged at different levels, not only through their unions, but as a collective across their sectoral organizing platforms. But we also then, there are some who are non-unionized, for example, the security sector cluster, our soldiers. I think we might need the help of our war veterans who are now civilians because they've contacts there. If we manage to have the consensus from the war veterans, they have their ways, what they are serving at some point, they have their ways of engaging with these particular structures of the security cluster. But we also understand that these are also citizens when they are not working. So when we do community outreaches, we also know we'll be able to meet with police officers who are not in uniform, with soldiers who are not in uniform. We are going to go to a community or in Kwadzana and start a dialogue around this issue. We will understand that we will meet some of them in those spaces. But we just have to go out there on a massive education, sensitization program. And so I'm glad there's already plans of developing IEC material, including flyers, which will then be distributed to the masses of our people. The key issue that we Zimbabweans should be able to embrace is that this is an urgent issue, and if we do not embrace an NTA now, Zimbabwe is still going to transform, but transform in a negative direction. It's going to degenerate in a way that will breed chaos, and no one is going to benefit. Only those who maybe have guns who are going to be looting, because at least they found something to use to force to get whatever they want from the people.
No, thanks for it, Cesar. It's work in progress. Yes, we're aware. We will be soon unfolding a program, an outreach program, which will lead us to the national conference and to the referendum. So maybe I'll come back to you as the last speaker again, just to give us some views on how the referendum will come about and the mechanics thereof. Tando, are you ready now? Hi, Tando. I can see you. I can't hear you. Oh, poor Tando. I can't hear you at all. Can't hear you at all. Huh? What shall we do? Get you to a better connectivity next time? Any luck? Try again. Try again. No, I can't hear you at all. Can't at all. Oh, shame. I'm so sorry. Then we have to leave it for the next time. Let me go back to Vitalis. Vitalis, are you there?
Hi, I'm here. All right.
Yes, you heard the narrative from Aubrey Basaraure, who's the teachers union, and he's also a member of the steering committee. The kind of work we're doing at the moment as part of the steering committee. How do you think one could do similarly with respect to the health workers in our country? I know you're no longer you're not in Zimbabwe right now, but clearly you've worked in the country, and you are in touch with people, including the one who didn't even know there was cholera in the country. How do you think? How do you think we should proceed?
I think there are people within the health sector who have the same feelings as you have, who actually would like change to occur. So what I would actually suggest is, can we look for those kind of things? And they are there. they can come together and then find a way of dealing with this situation that we find ourselves in, because in the long run, it's not going to help anyone. And also, they are suffering under the same. A lot of them are frustrated. A lot of them are finding it very hard where they work, where things are dilapidated, things are not in place. So it's a question of, I'm sure they also even have organizations in Zim for doctors where we could try to find whether we can recruit people who are like-minded as Obed, yourself, and the others to assist in shaping the way forward.
Yeah, thanks very much, Vitalis. Nick, is anything to say to us? Your last words? Have you listened to our discussion? And if you understood the way we want to go with the NTA, what advice can you give?
My main advice is people, in addition to many personal, ideological and political motives, people also have economic motives, and understanding what those in power have to lose must be part of the strategy of thinking about economic change, or of political change, sorry. I don't have anything more insightful than that, but it's just people have benefited from the current system, and it's worth thinking about specifically how they've benefited and thinking about what opposition you might face in any political change, partly based on economic rationales.
One thing, Nick, which I would like to leave with you, while thanking you for, again, coming to our rescue, is if you can, some stage, engage with us on the questions I raised earlier on. So really not only how to monitor the and even retrospectively, the extent of the corruption, and in particular the extent to which the country has lost to corruption, how to quantify this in relation to the political economy of the country, and in terms of the immediate requirements of the country in the health sector, employment creation, and so on and so forth. And above all, how we can put in place, as part of the process that we're engaged in, a mechanism, working with people like yourselves out there, to begin tracking and eventually have these resources repatriated to the country in a systematic fashion.
Yeah, and I would also urge that I think there's an agenda which can help ordinary Zimbabweans work out where their money is going and will help deter corruption in the future, because whoever comes into power will face the same incentives in a system which has been based a lot on corruption and patronage. You might, if you're in power, face the same problems of having to buy off people, but the way that you make it difficult for any angel coming into politics, I think is partly through radical transparency. And by that I mean that all companies have their true beneficial owners and shareholders and directors listed online on a simple portal that every Zimbabwean can check. That all public infrastructure contracts, for example, not just for building the most recent interchange, but for Command Agriculture and so on, and money spent by Mutapa Investment Fund, all of those contracts are made public, and payments towards those contracts are listed and made public, and that the losing bidders in competitive procurement processes, those are also made public, and that mining companies and the mining ministry, the country joins up to the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, and all mining companies and oil companies make any payments they make to the fiscus public, so that then people can compare those incoming payments with a public budget. And once you have those kind of payments, transparency over contracts, over payments and over ownership of companies, then it's very difficult, or much more difficult, to have that large-scale corruption that we've seen. And I think that would be a good way of keeping any politician honest in the future and removing temptations, because it will therefore be exposed.
Are there any precedents in your experience?
So there's an entity or an organization, a network called Open Contracting Partnership, and they list out different countries that have put all of their procurement online so people can see it. And a lot of the time the losing bidders in public procurement complain, or the trade unions complain, because they know that something isn't being delivered to the quality or the price. So Mexico has done a lot of this, for example. And then Nigeria has just introduced a nice open mining portal where you can see which company owns which title for mining in a certain area, and lists out those companies, and then you can go to the beneficial ownership and work out who owns those companies. So there are examples that Zimbabwe can borrow from. It's not reinventing the wheel. This is it's not even best practice. It's taking decent practice from different countries and having this kind of open, transparent way of spending public money.
That's a very useful suggestion. Thanks, Nick. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
last again, I come back to Obed Masaraure for your last word. Something on the referendum, proposed referendum for the NTA. Cesara Masaraure. Masaraure. I think I've lost him, so maybe it's for me now just to summarize quickly. I was trying to get Masaraure, who's a member of our steering committee, and also who has been a panelist on this discussion, to outline further the discussion around the proposed referendum. This morning we were able to have sight of the Referendum Act, and as Tendai Biti suggested on the 15th of May, it would be useful following a very comprehensive national conference, which will be attended by all stakeholders across the country and in the diaspora, and also buttressed by a group of elders, eminent persons, mainly Zimbabweans, but also people from the region, who will assist in smoothing over the process from the national conference to the referendum, from the referendum to the NTA itself. So we are pleased that we, in terms of our work program, the next weeks and months ahead, we will have a referendum. But that requires that first and foremost, we have more and more of such discussions, and also committees in every province, through which people will become familiar with the possibilities that are attendant to the NTA. At the moment, there's a lot of skepticism, but skepticism can only be dispelled by commitment that it can be done. And I think what the people like Masaraure and Vitalis have said today, it is possible to get things done. And I'm glad to tell you here that we are work in progress. And let's keep in touch. In the next few weeks, you'll be getting more and more information on this process. And we'll be seeking ways of engaging you more directly as we go on. So thank you very much. Until we meet next fortnight.